Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, and today is part 2 of our previous episode on which labs to run through perimenopause and menopause to answer the question, why do I feel awful if my labs look normal? So welcome back. And if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I highly recommend you go check that out. We were talking all about the conventional labs and blood work that you can run, often even through insurance, but how to look at those through an optimal reference range, how to look at personalized medicine and labs being really information about your terrain, your body's ability to get into a healing state, and how to use those labs for prevention and optimal health, not just to say, yes, no, high, low, flagged or not flagged, and certainly to go way beyond just your complete blood count or your metabolic panel and some cholesterol, right? We talked about so much more in that episode. So please go check it out if you haven't listened already. And today we're going to jump into some more in-depth advanced functional lab testing, why I run it, when it might be applicable, and how you can go about doing that yourself. So now that we've explored what we can learn from conventional labs interpreted through a functional lens, let's go even deeper into the specialty labs that I rely on to uncover the full story for healing your terrain. They go way beyond symptoms and diagnosis for sure. They help me to see patterns over time and anticipate dysfunction before it becomes disease so that I can guide your care with precision. I absolutely rely heavily on labs at the beginning of working with a patient, in part because they're really motivational. If you see that we ran a stool test and you have dysbiosis, so your microbiome is potentially contributing to your anxiety, your gut health is certainly contributing to your hormones, it's a lot easier for you to make the changes that I'm asking you to make. I just know this over practicing medicine for 12 years and working with a lot of patients on health transformations. So labs, in part for me, yes, they're great information. They help me prevent any disease that might be down the line for you because we're tracking them, but they're also motivation, right? On top of being a motivating factor to make change, labs will help me to essentially sequence or go in the right order when we're working on a complex chronic healing process. So I might be able to uncover hidden stressors that we wouldn't have otherwise known about, and I can really create personalized individual strategies for you as a person that support your whole terrain. And again, in my practice, we are focused on mind, body, and spirit. I know that these last 2 episodes are very kind of science heavy and lab heavy, and we're talking about gut health and mitochondria and hormones and how that impacts your brain health. But all of these physical pieces of the puzzle are going to contribute to how your mind, body, and your spirit can navigate these transitions. And as a reminder that if you're curious to explore some of these tests on your own, I really do believe in empowering my patients to learn how to take care of themselves, but you might not be a patient yet and you just want to check out where or how you can run some of these labs. I've created a brand new lab shop through Rupa Health. I've partnered with Rupa Health for many years now, and you'll be able to see some of the same functional panels that I use in practice with patients. So from hormone testing to gut health to viral responses. You can check out some of those panels in my new lab shop that I will link in the show notes. And I have a blog post, Instagram posts, and I'm creating a lab interpretation handout for you. So, again, I know that your eyes might glaze over and get a little bored in these episodes where I'm going over lab results or theoretical, right? Because they don't even apply to you. It's at least more fun when they're your labs. But hopefully, some of those additional resources can help you to maybe pause the episode, go back, check out your labs. And as I said in the last episode, I really like to keep patient labs all in one place. They're obviously on their patient portal. So if you're not a patient, you can start to keep track of your own labs, whether it's in a binder or in a notes folder on your computer, however you like to do that, so that when you come to see someone like me, you have patterns that you've tracked over time. Okay, so even though the vital spirit method starts with the gut brain axis, and I typically start with blood work that I put through a patient's insurance and a stool test, I'm going to start our episode today talking about the Dutch panel. Now, the Dutch Complete Panel is a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. That's what Dutch stands for. And it's going to provide a more in depth look at your hormones, but it's not just your sex hormones. So let's talk about what that means. So, we talked in the last episode about how I will run hormones in the serum, but I'm going to be very aware of the fact that, for example, your progesterone will be at its peak at day 21. Or, for example, if I'm working a patient up for fertility, I might look at things like FSH and LH on day 3. So, I'm very aware of the fact that hormones will fluctuate throughout the cycle and then also throughout perimenopause, right? So, we've talked in previous episodes about how estrogen might be getting really high and then really low. Remember that toddler on the dimmer of the light switch? And we talked about how progesterone is one of the first hormones that's starting to decline in perimenopause. So in the Dutch panel, we're going to see not only your estrogen metabolites, so that's E1 estrone, E2 estradiol, and E3 estriol, but you're also going to see phase 1 and 2 detox pathways. So remember, your liver and your gut have to detox estrogen. So we're going to see how well your body's doing that. We're also going to see progesterone and its downstream metabolite. How are you breaking that down in your body, essentially? It will look at androgens, so testosterone, DHEA, DHT, and androgen metabolites. And additionally, it's going to look at a 4-point cortisol curve. So your cortisol should be highest in the morning when you wake up, you're ready to deal with the stressors of the day. And then it's going to come down throughout the day and then be low at night. And when it's low at night, that's when your melatonin comes up and you go to sleep. So melatonin and cortisol have this little dance that they do. And if you want to know how your body is responding to stress throughout the day, and you want to look at the health of your HPA axis, that cortisol curve is a really great start. And the Dutch panel also in some of the versions of it will look at cortisone metabolites. So that's totally different than cortisol. And it just gives us a better idea of how your body is processing that stress hormone. It can also tell us if you're making enough cortisol to essentially wake you up and get the day started, as well as looking at melatonin. So if you are struggling with sleep through perimenopause, knowing your cortisol and melatonin levels can be really important to assessing your circadian rhythm health and knowing where to intervene. The Dutch panel also has organic acid markers. So it does give me a little bit of an idea around things like B12 status, glutathione status, which is your major master antioxidant in the body. It will give me dopamine and norepinephrine metabolites. Remember, we talked all about neurotransmitters in another episode and how they relate to mood. It will also tell me a little bit about neuroinflammation and oxidative stress markers. So, for example, if I can see that your oxidative stress is a really big deal at this phase of life, then I know that that's going to predispose you to inflammatory conditions, and I'm going to need to support you with really great levels of antioxidants and focus on that in diet as well. Some of the things that I might find in a Dutch panel would include estrogen dominance, so estrogen relatively high compared to progesterone, poor estrogen metabolism or methylation. We can look at the different metabolites of estrogen. So, for example, 4-hydroxy estrogen is going to be more DNA damaging and create a higher risk for estrogen-based cancer. So that's really important for a lot of the women that I work with. We might also see low progesterone patterns. A flat cortisol curve is a very common one in women who have what we call adrenal fatigue or burnout, and other signs of HPA axis dysfunction or essentially impaired stress response. So if we've already run blood work, and I'm sure everything didn't always look fine, but let's just go with an example that it did. The Dutch panel can go a little bit further even and give me an idea of what's going on with your hormonal rhythms, your stress response, your detoxification ability, nutrient cofactors for making your hormones and neurotransmitters. And then I'm really able to prioritize what the best next step is for you. Now, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I'm typically not running those advanced hormone panels until the second pillar of working with me because I do start with gut health. And the gut is the foundation to everything that I do in the Vital Spirit method when you first start working with me. Now, the way that I assess gut health is by running a stool test. So we joke in my practice all the time that, yes, I'm going to send you home with a box and it has what looks like a fry container collection device. So, yes, when you go to a concession stand and you get fries, you're never going to think the same way about your fries again because you're going to use that same container to give me a stool sample. And it's not as complicated as it sounds, although not everyone enjoys giving a stool sample. But yes, we talk about poop here all day because it really is one of the most important variables in your hormone health, in your perimenopause journey, and your menopause journey. So you do get that sample for me at home over the course of 3 days. And then I'm able to see what your commensal bacteria look like. So those are all the beneficial microbes that make up your gut microbiome. They're important for your immune health, for estrogen metabolism, for inflammation. I look so much at commensal bacteria and how it might relate to things like anxiety or depression. That test is also going to give me numbers like your short chain fatty acid status. So things like butyrate, which nourishes our colon cells, reducing inflammation and repairing the gut lining. One of the most important numbers I get in that stool sample is something called your fecal secretory IgA. So this is your gut's first line of immune defense, essentially. So low levels can mean immune depletion, and high levels are a sign of chronic gut inflammation. I'm also going to get numbers like your calprotectin and EPX. Calprotectin is an inflammatory marker that I track in my IBD, inflammatory bowel disease patients. So that's Crohn's and colitis. And so many patients over the years have been able to lower that number. It's really a big win clinically when you see that calprotectin go down, that IgA down within normal range as you address dysbiosis. It's also going to give me your digestive enzyme. So we look at things like pancreatic elastase. Are you able to break down your protein and your fat in your diet? Remember, you need protein for all those healthy neurotransmitters. You need fat to make your hormones. And if there is fat malabsorption, it'll show up in the stool sample. And then it also does screen for things like blood in the stool and other markers that can help guide our treatment protocols, such as bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, and parasites. I know parasites have gotten to be all the rage on social media, I guess, because patients keep coming in and asking about them. And the test that I use is a 3-day test that is 99.9% accurate in its parasitology because they also do a DNA amplification for parasites. So it is a wonderful starting point for all of my patients because, again, it motivates you to really get started on changing diet and lifestyle because you see how it's impacting your gut. And if you have opportunistic bacteria or yeast or parasites, or your gut is inflamed or under functioning, then your hormones, your brain, and your immune system can't thrive. So this test really does give me a precise map of where to start the healing process. And I can't say enough about understanding the gut-brain axis. Again, you can go back to my first few episodes all about that. And it's such a great starting point when you're looking to optimize and thrive. The next test I rely on quite a bit in my practice is a SIBO breath test, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this test is going to test for hydrogen and methane gas production from bacteria that can overgrow in the small intestine. This is also a test that you can do at home, which is nice for patients. I should say that the Dutch panel and the stool test are also tests that patients do at home. And when you have hydrogen predominant SIBO, that can be linked to chronic bloating, loose stool, fatigue. Methane dominant SIBO can be linked to chronic constipation, again, bloating, weight gain, kind of that slower transit time in the bowels. Very often, SIBO is a contributing factor to IBS, both the constipation form of IBS and the more irritable, frequent bowel movement form of IBS. So it's something that I'm testing for quite a bit in practice. And you can also have mixed SIBO. You can have both types, but essentially a SIBO breath test is a collection that you do at home. You breathe into a collection pouch. And if you have bacteria in your small intestine where they shouldn't be, then the drink that you drink before the collection is when you breathe out into this collection pouch, it's going to have more gas than you would expect if you did not have bacteria growing in the small intestine. So for me, it's really important because SIBO can disrupt nutrient absorption. So again, when we're thinking around things like nutrient deficiency, why is that occurring? Well, SIBO can contribute to that. It can damage the gut lining and cause some of that increase in fecal secretory IgA or gut inflammation that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. It can certainly interfere with hormone metabolism by impairing your estrogen clearance. So if you're chronically constipated because of SIBO overgrowth, then you're not going to be clearing those toxic estrogens that we've talked about in previous episodes. So that will impact, obviously, bloating, mood, and detoxification. And I do notice with my SIBO patients that they say that their skin has much improved once we clear that. And I would say things like rosacea, eczema, psoriasis can all be linked to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And for me in practice, I think one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that this answers for women is the constipation, bloating, and weight gain piece. So you can't tell if someone has SIBO by looking at a stool test. You might have some clues that SIBO is going on. For example, they might have a lot of methane dominant bacteria in the stool test, but it really is a separate test that needs to be run to confirm if SIBO is playing a role or not. If a patient very clearly has SIBO when they first come in, I might send them home with a kit immediately. But again, sometimes this is one that I'm waiting until I have the stool test back or some of the blood work back before I'm running. And I'm running it if I'm kind of still scratching my head as to what's going on with that patient. I might also go a little more in depth beyond the organic acid panel that's included in the Dutch panel and run an organic acid test. So with this test, I might be looking at things like mitochondrial function. So maybe that patient has low energy and I really want to look at their mitochondrial health. I might be looking at more B vitamin status than I was able to look at in their blood work. So I might see a functional need for things like B1, B2, B3, B12. Again, I've probably looked at B6 already. And certainly neurotransmitter metabolites and neurotransmitter balance. So looking at metabolites of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And I might also look at glutathione and detox pathway markers here. Another really simple at-home test that I'll use with patients can be the hair tissue mineral analysis test. So I use a company that will look at not only toxic elements in the hair, so things like mercury, aluminum, lead, arsenic, cadmium, which can burden your liver, which can impact your brain, your mitochondrial health, but it will also look at key minerals like magnesium, potassium, calcium, zinc, and the ratios of those elements, which can indicate high stress, thyroid status, and other signs of inflammation. Next would be genetic testing. So some of the more common genetic tests that I run would be, for example, MTHFR. So MTHFR, which stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, is a gene that codes for an enzyme of the same name that affects methylation in our body. So essentially, if you have a mutation or a SNP, really just a difference in this gene that doesn't allow your body to methylate as well, which I think it's 75 to 80% of the population has, then it's going to affect your ability to methylate or add a methylation group to things like neurotransmitters to make them active. It's important for estrogen clearance and detoxification. It's important for cardiovascular health. So MTHFR, which has two variants, is something that I'll often test for in patients, either in their first couple visits, or I might, again, look at that homocysteine number and see, is methylation likely an issue in this patient? And it is going to be really important in things like depression, fatigue, cardiovascular risk. I might also look at genetic markers for something called COMT, which regulates the breakdown of your excitatory neurotransmitters, so dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And if you have slow COMT pathways, that can lead to anxiety, overstimulation, estrogen dominance, for example. And a really fast COMT pathway can lead to low motivation, fatigue, burnout. And I might use other genetic testing as needed. So, again, this is usually a little bit further down the line where we've worked on the seeds of health. We've looked at some of the more basic functional medicine panels, and I'm really maybe still scratching my head or looking to further optimize health and prevent disease. In the last episode, I did talk about some of the chronic immune system burdens or chronic infectious markers that I run. So I did mention Epstein-Barr virus, although most people have had Epstein-Barr virus and might come up positive to an IgG antibody past exposure screen. Not everyone will have reactivation. So an early antigen D reactivation marker is something that I'll often look at when patients are chronically fatigued or if they have autoimmune flares or they're getting sick all the time. I will certainly look at that early antigen D. I might also run some other chronic viral load markers at this point. So that might be things like the herpes family of viruses, herpes 6, cytomegalovirus, parvovirus, really understanding what I like to just call chronic viral load and the role that it might play in that person's health. And then I did mention last time that I will do a Candida screen. Candida will also come up in the stool test, although Candida can hide out a little bit. Candida can be a little tricky. And so I do like to see if that person is making antibodies to Candida as well. And then food sensitivities and allergies. First, I will usually start with the allergies actually in that conventional blood workup. So I probably should have mentioned that in the last episode, but I had it lumped in this category of things that can cause immune system dysregulation and inflammation. So definitely in that first pillar working together, I'm ruling out food allergies, but then again, if we're really trying to clean up diet even further and really optimize health, I might ask questions around what foods is there a sensitivity to. So food allergies are mediated by IgE antibodies. They're immediate. They're the things that when they're high cause anaphylactic shock or hives versus sensitivities, which are delayed and they're mediated by IgG antibodies. And sometimes we'll even look at IgA antibodies as well. So these background immune burdens are essentially things that can deplete your terrain or make you more susceptible to other infections, and they certainly do contribute to overall health. And then I certainly might get a little bit more in depth with autoimmune screening. So autoimmune issues emerge very commonly during hormonal transitions. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is very common to see come up during perimenopause. And a lot of my patients through midlife might have autoimmune markers, but not have a formal autoimmune diagnosis. And when we treat the terrain, I very often see those markers improve or resolve. So I did mention this one last time that ANA, anti-nuclear antibodies, is a general screen for autoimmune activity. And this can be positive years before a diagnosis. The thyroid antibodies I did mention, so your anti-TPO and anti-thyroglobulin antibodies, which can indicate Hashimoto's, very commonly will be elevated before that patient has an actual diagnosis. And these are things that we can work on reversing. And I might run additional antibodies, for example, like rheumatoid factor. I might run antibodies such as your ANCAs when I'm screening for Crohn's or colitis. And I like to talk about autoimmune disease like a bonfire. I will definitely have an episode on this because I don't have time in this one. But you can imagine if you've ever been to a bonfire, you need the beach, right? You need the tide to be right and not too high. It can't be raining. You've got to dig a hole for the bonfire. Then you've got to start the bonfire. You need kindling. You've got to light it. You need a match. Then you've got to keep the bonfire going. You've got to call your friends. So when a patient comes up just with a positive ANA, I start to explain to them, okay, we've got the beach, we've got the the whole, maybe there's some kindling, but we don't have to invite all the friends to this bonfire. It doesn't have to become a raging fire. So screening for autoimmunity is so important. If you take anything home from this episode, because I know there's a lot of labs in it, take home that you can screen for autoimmunity before it becomes a problem, and there are things to do about it. The main autoimmune conditions that I screen for would be Hashimoto's thyroiditis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis and eczema, and autoimmune colitis or IBS and IBD. These are very common in my practice. I've been treating them for a long time. And the earlier that you catch these, the easier it is to intervene and reverse them. So as you can see, there's a lot that can be done as far as functional testing goes. It's very powerful, but it still is not about chasing deficiencies. It's not about chasing the labs and throwing supplements at those numbers and trying to get the numbers to normalize. It's about how you feel. And it's also about asking questions. Why is this pattern showing up? What story is your terrain telling you? What's the root cause of this imbalance? What role is stress playing in all of this, right? And throughout the Vital Spirit method, which I've outlined for you in previous episodes, I try to connect your labs with your lived experience. So obviously taking into account trauma history, nervous system patterns, diet, lifestyle, and then we're able to really create a roadmap for your healing from the inside out. So if you stuck through this whole episode and even are following along from the last episode, you've gotten your brain exploded with lots of lab markers. Again, I know it can be a little bit boring, so maybe pause some of these and go back and check on your labs, reach out to me or your healthcare provider and ask questions about what you can dig at further. But let's wrap this all up with a quick little case study, which I think is a more interesting than just rambling on about labs. So a woman came to me in her early 50s, and she really was looking for focus on optimal health. She had been told that there was nothing that she could do for some of her labs that were out of range. So, for example, she had been diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. She had a homocysteine and HSCRP, which are those inflammatory markers I look at that were through the roof. Her fasting insulin was really high. Her liver enzymes were elevated. And instead of jumping right to interventions, one of the first things that I did with her was work on nervous system regulation. So she had been using alcohol quite a bit for stress reduction. So part of my workup with her when I was looking at her blood sugar, I was looking at her elevated liver enzymes, I was looking at the inflammation coming up. Part of my work with her was, okay, what can we do instead of that glass of wine at night to unwind? How can we get the body to relax and get into that healing nervous system state so that we don't feel like we need the alcohol? That was step one. And then as we ran her stool test, we discovered some dysbiosis and inflammation, which I wasn't surprised by. And we started there. And the process did take a few months. And I remember one of the days that she had gone to her primary and showed them that her homocysteine was down, her HSCRP was down, her liver enzymes were normalizing, right? And they were amazed. They could not believe the changes that she had made. And I think more importantly than her labs improving was that she really transformed. She had more energy. Her relationships were improving. She started exercising. She ended up going on this kind of dream vacation bucket list trip a few months after we had started working together. And it took effort. She definitely made a lot of dietary changes. She put in the work, but without the roadmap to guide her and without getting her nervous system into that kind of rest, digest, healing state, I don't know that she would have had the energy to put in some of the work that she had to put in. So I think having the labs and then also having the ability to kind of step back and say, well, first things first, let's get your body into a healing state and let's be methodical and let's do this in the right order. I think it's what made it doable for her. And she was just it was such a delight to work with her and to see her excitement over these labs reversing. If I'm remembering correctly, I think she also had a positive anti-nuclear antibody or that autoimmune screen, and that's been negative since. I'm thinking of a few different patients right now who have normalized those ANAs and again, very often have been told by a conventional practitioner that there's nothing that they can do about it. And so there's a lot that you can do about your health in my world. And I think that labs are a wonderful place to start because it gives you context. It lets you know what patterns you need to focus on. I very often say to patients, it helps me know what bucket I'm going to put you in essentially. Are you in the inflammation bucket? Are you in the blood sugar dysregulation bucket? Are you in the chronic stealth pathogen bucket? What's the first bucket that we need to empty so that we can get your body into a healing state? So, you already know the importance of a whole body approach if you're here. You know how important it is to listen to your body. I've made episodes about this, but now you know that it's also time to listen to your labs. Listen to the data that your body's giving you. And no, it's not just about treating labs, but labs are so key in the way that I practice at Roots Deep Medicine and walking patients through the Vital Spirit method. In the last episode, I really tried to focus on labs that you can get run and covered by insurance. Even if your doctor's not familiar with them, you can bring them that list and you can ask them questions about those labs. I hope that this helps to educate other practitioners around whole body health and how we can really optimize our health and we can screen for disease before it occurs and we can create the conditions for healing. So, if you want more information on that, I have a whole blog post on lab testing. I have a handout on lab interpretation, and you can download that. And I also created that new lab shop for you so you can even do some of this on your own. And as always, take a deep breath before you dive in. Find a provider that you trust and remember that you are not broken. You are becoming on this health awakening journey. So if this resonated with you, please download, please subscribe, and please share with someone that you think might benefit from a more holistic approach to their health through midlife and beyond. I'm so glad that you're here, and I look forward to next time.